December 16, 1944. The Hürtgen Forest, a maze of pine and fog on Germany's western border. The dawn was slow to arrive. Only the dull orange of artillery flashes broke the darkness. Snow mixed with ash drifted through the trees, settling on broken helmets and the frozen earth. The air stank of cordite and damp moss, a place where sound died before it could echo. A platoon from the 28th Infantry Division moved cautiously along a narrow trail. Their boots sank into mud laced with ice. Every few steps someone stopped to listen. Somewhere ahead, half buried in the hillside, was a concrete bunker, part of the Siegfried Line. The maps marked it as inactive. The silence around it suggested otherwise. Rifles raised, the men approached. The entrance was scarred with blast marks, its steel door cracked open. No shots, no movement. Just the slow drip of melted snow. When the first soldier pushed through the doorway, the beam of his flashlight cut through the dust and smoke. What it revealed inside would stop them cold and rewrite their understanding of what Germany had been building in the dark. The Western Front, autumn 1944. By late 1944, the Allied armies had clawed their way across France and into the edges of Western Germany. What had once seemed like an unstoppable push after the liberation of Paris now began to slow. Supply lines stretched thin. Mud swallowed vehicles. Exhaustion crept into every foxhole and tent. The promise of home by Christmas was fading. The U.S. First Army under Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges faced the next great obstacle, the Siegfried Line, known to the Germans as the West Wall. It was not one line but a vast network of concrete bunkers, dragon's teeth minefields and machine gun nests, running more than 630 kilometers from the Netherlands to Switzerland. Built in the 1930s and reinforced during the war, it was Germany's last shield before the Rhine. At the center of this fortress line lay the Hürtgen Forest, an ancient woodland southeast of Aachen. Its thick pines blocked sightlines, dampened artillery blasts, and turned daylight into twilight. The U.S. Army had fought through Normandy's hedgerows across the plains of France, but nothing had prepared them for this. Inside the forest, visibility often dropped to 20 meters. Maps were useless. Compass bearings twisted under the canopy. German positions, camouflaged and connected by underground tunnels, seemed to appear from nowhere. When the American 28th Infantry Division entered the forest in November 1944, they found themselves walking into what one officer later called a green hell. Every hill was mined, every path covered by machine guns. German defenders from the 275th and 303rd Infantry Divisions knew the terrain intimately. They fought from dugouts that had survived months of bombardment, protected by logs, steel, and earth. For every bunker destroyed, another seemed to emerge deeper in the woods. The forest also favored the defenders in other ways. Rain and snow turned the ground into a swamp. Radios failed under the dense canopy, forcing soldiers to rely on runners. Evacuating the wounded was nearly impossible. Men froze in foxholes or bled out waiting for medics. The U.S. Army's superior numbers meant little. Artillery and air power were nearly useless here. The fighting was slow, methodical, and merciless. Towns like Schmidt and Wassenack became killing grounds. The goal was simple on paper: break through the forest, secure the Ruhr River dams, and open a route to the Rhine. But for every meter gained, dozens of men were lost. The Germans, even as their empire crumbled elsewhere, held the Hürtgen with fanatic resolve. By early December, small American units began probing deeper than planned. The front lines were fluid, the maps unreliable. Intelligence was scarce. Reports circulated about hidden supply depots and command bunkers buried under the hills. Some were rumored to store fuel, weapons, or coded communications equipment, remnants of a defensive network meant to buy Germany time. The closer the Americans pushed to the Ruhr, the more they encountered strange fortifications, not just defensive emplacements, but sealed bunkers with no apparent purpose. Engineers noted differences: thicker concrete, reinforced steel doors, ventilation shafts that extended far underground. These weren't ordinary pillboxes. They were something else. Behind every mound of dirt and twisted pine root lay uncertainty. What were the Germans guarding so fiercely? And why, in a forest of collapsing defenses, were some bunkers deliberately left intact, booby-trapped on the outside but pristine within? That question haunted the men of the 28th Division as they advanced, one frozen step at a time, through terrain where even victory felt like defeat. Each captured bunker seemed to lead them deeper into a mystery buried under layers of mud, frost, and silence. One of those bunkers, marked B473 on the division's map, stood near a ravine north of Schmidt. It looked ordinary, a concrete box with slanted walls half swallowed by earth. But the patrol sent to clear it that December morning would soon realize they had stumbled upon something entirely different, something the German army had tried to hide. Not from the Allies, but from history itself. The forest waited in silence, concealing its secret beneath the frost. The hidden logic of German defenses as winter tightened its grip over the Western Front. Germany's military machine was running on desperation, but not on chaos. Behind the collapsing facade of the Reich lay an intricate web of planning, secrecy, and technological preservation. Every fortification, every tunnel, every sealed chamber had a purpose. The Siegfried Line, though partly obsolete by 1944 standards, had been quietly repurposed during the final months of the war. Under the direction of Field Marshal Walter Model, the Army Group B commander, engineers, and SS units worked together to transform select bunkers into storage vaults and research shelters. These weren't meant for soldiers. They were built for ideas, for the remnants of Germany's technological dreams. Berlin was falling apart under Allied bombing, and the Reich's ministries had begun to scatter their secrets across the countryside. Factories relocated underground, laboratories disappeared into mines. Convoys transported equipment and documents westward, away from Soviet reach. The Hurtgen forest, with its natural cover and fortified terrain, became one of many chosen hiding places. Among the items deemed worth preserving were prototypes of V-weapons, chemical munitions, encrypted communications devices, and experimental data tied to advanced aircraft and rocketry. By late 1944, the German war effort had shifted from expansion to containment, not of the Allies, but of knowledge. What couldn't be saved on the battlefield was buried beneath it. The Allies, meanwhile, had begun to notice signs of this hidden transfer. Reports from intelligence units and aerial reconnaissance hinted at unusual activity along the Siegfried Line. Reinforced ventilation towers, truck convoys at night, and bunkers that emitted faint heat signatures despite being declared inactive. These details seemed minor at first, until cross-referenced with intercepted German communications that mentioned Sonderanlagen or special installations. The Americans knew little about what those words meant, but British intelligence had started piecing together clues through the Alsos mission, a joint operation tasked with locating and seizing enemy scientific research before it could fall into Soviet hands. As Allied troops pushed east, every bunker and factory became a potential source of intelligence, a hidden vault of wartime innovation. Inside the Hurtgen forest, however, most frontline soldiers knew nothing of this. Their orders were simple: advance, clear, survive. Intelligence summaries often arrived days late, if at all. For the men of the 28th Infantry Division, the war was immediate: dirt, fear, and cold steel. Yet unknowingly, they were about to intersect with one of those special installations. In December 1944, the division's battered regiments had been rotated and reinforced after devastating losses earlier that autumn. The 112th Infantry Regiment, in particular, had been tasked with holding a stretch of forest north of Schmidt. Intelligence suggested German units were withdrawing, but that same intelligence was already outdated. Deep under the forest floor, small Wehrmacht detachments remained, guarding bunkers whose true nature wasn't listed in any field manual. Some American patrols had already reported strange encounters: sealed steel doors with heavy bolts, signs of recent activity near supposedly abandoned sites, faint generator hums beneath the soil. But the forest was filled with noises: wind through broken trees, creaking logs, the distant thud of artillery, and few wanted to believe that anything still moved down there. Then came the orders for a sweep of the sector. One specific target, Bunker 473, identified on aerial photos as a reinforced communications post. The plan was routine. A small unit would move in, secure the entrance, and report. It was the kind of mission that blended into the monotony of forest warfare. But the bunker had been misidentified. What lay behind its shattered door was not a radio station nor an ammunition dump. It was something deliberately hidden, constructed under the guise of defense, a secret that had survived even as the front collapsed around it. The Americans advancing toward that structure had no idea they were about to uncover a fragment of a greater story. The Reich's final attempt to conceal its technological ambitions from the eyes of the world. The forest had been brutal, but now it was about to become mysterious. And for the men approaching that door, history itself waited just beyond the flicker of a flashlight beam. The human angle, fear, fatigue, and the faces beneath the helmets by. December 1944, the soldiers of the 28th Infantry Division were ghosts of their former selves. They had survived Normandy, fought through France, and been torn apart in the Hurtgen forest. Their uniforms were soaked, their boots rotting, their nerves stretched to breaking. Many had not bathed in weeks. Letters from home came damp and torn. Cigarettes were currency, coffee a miracle. Among them were boys barely out of high school and veterans who had seen too much. They were led by captains who looked 20 years older than they were. Every man carried a silent fear, not of death itself, but of the slow, uncertain way it came in that forest. A mine, a sniper, a tree shattered by shellfire. When the patrol was ordered to advance on Bunker 473, there was no talk of glory, just the mechanical rhythm of discipline. Check rifles, test radios, move forward. They were tired of surprises. Bunkers usually meant machine guns and grenades. They did not yet imagine what waited behind this one. The sergeant leading the group, one of the last from his original company, had stopped expecting sense in war. One more hole in the ground, he muttered as they moved. But deep down, every man hoped this might be the last. The end of the forest. The end of the killing. Human endurance had become its own kind of warfare. Each step toward that bunker wasn't just a movement through terrain. It was a step through the limits of the human mind, where exhaustion, fear, and duty blended into a single numb instinct. Keep going. 2. The tactical angle, how the assault was planned and executed. The assault on Bunker 473 wasn't grand or cinematic. It was tactical routine, shaped by experience and necessity. The platoon, roughly 30 men, was supported by a single Browning automatic rifle, a pair of flamethrowers, and engineers carrying demolition charges. They advanced before dawn, moving in staggered formation. The forest was too dense for vehicles, so everything, ammunition, explosives, rations, had to be carried by hand. Communication was handled through short-range field radios, which crackled and failed under the canopy. Reconnaissance aerial photographs suggested the bunker was small, with one entrance and an observation slit. But the Americans had learned not to trust photographs. Many Siegfried Line positions had multiple exits, and the Germans were masters of concealment. As they approached the coordinates, scouts marked possible machine gun nests. Engineers checked for tripwires. Nothing. The silence was unnerving. No dogs barking, no gunfire, just wind moving through the skeletal branches. The plan was simple. Secure the perimeter, breach the entrance, clear room by room. The engineers would lead, followed by riflemen. One squad would remain outside to provide covering fire in case of ambush. At 0600, they reached visual contact with the structure. The bunker's facade was partly collapsed, covered in frost and debris. The steel door hung slightly ajar. An open door in enemy territory was never a good sign. Protocol demanded caution. But the longer they waited, the more they risked counterattack. Finally, with hand signals and quiet nods, the first team moved forward. They expected bullets. Instead, they found the door unguarded and the entrance cold. No heat, no sound, no bodies. Just the echo of boots on concrete. Tactically, the bunker was a mystery. Its walls were thicker than usual, the door built for containment rather than defense. One soldier later remarked it felt more like a vault than a fort. The design defied battlefield logic, and that alone made it dangerous. The terrain and weather angle, nature as the silent enemy in the Hurtgen, nature was as lethal as the enemy. The forest itself seemed to conspire against human survival. The canopy, dense and unbroken, turned artillery shells into splinters. deadly rain that shredded anyone below. The mud could swallow a man up to his knees. Visibility fell to a few meters, and every fallen tree became a fortress. When the Americans approached the bunker, the snow had begun again. It fell sideways, driven by wind, clinging to faces and rifles. The cold was the kind that cut through wool and bone. Men's hands shook, not from fear, but from freezing blood. Inside their coats, many carried small fragments of home, photos, tokens, letters folded and refolded until the ink blurred. But in the forest, sentiment had no warmth. The geography also shaped the psychology. Soldiers described the forest as alive, breathing with sounds. A crack of a branch could mean a sniper or just the weight of snow. The fog thickened the air until even sound seemed to move slower. Every step forward toward that bunker felt like an intrusion into something ancient and unwilling to let them pass. The Germans had known this. They had chosen the Hurtgen for its hostility, its ability to grind down even the strongest army. The forest blurred the lines between battle and burial. When the Americans reached Bunker 473, they did so half as soldiers, half as survivors, crawling through mud and frost toward a structure that seemed as much a tomb as a target. And somewhere, deep inside that silence beneath meters of concrete and steel, history was waiting to be found. Farfor, the technological angle, the fortress within the fortress. To the casual eye, the Siegfried Line was a wall of concrete and steel. But to German engineers, it was also a canvas for innovation. Each bunker, or Regelbau, followed standard, models numbered by purpose, observation, artillery, command, or communications. Yet by 1944, many of these designs had evolved beyond defense. The Germans had turned several sites into multi-layered vaults, equipped with reinforced air filtration, diesel generators, and armored storage cells. These additions were often hidden behind false walls or beneath trapdoors. Some contained advanced radio relay equipment, others held chemical samples, blueprints, or experimental optics. When the Americans entered Bunker 473, their first impression confirmed the strangeness. The corridor sloped downward, an unusual feature for a front-line bunker. Its walls were thick with condensation, and steel conduits ran along the ceiling, feeding into heavy junction boxes. A smell of oil and ozone hung in the air. One engineer recognized the pattern. These weren't combat power lines. They were research-grade electrical conduits, similar to those used in laboratories or testing facilities. The ventilation shafts, too, were unusually wide, suggesting an attempt to circulate clean air underground. Such construction pointed to repurposing. The bunker had been built for defense, then adapted for secrecy. The Germans had mastered this dual use. What appeared as a military outpost was often a technical depot or data repository. Later reports would reveal that many of these bunkers stored scientific equipment, parts of radar assemblies, communication decoders, and components linked to the V-2 rocket program. They were fragments of a technological race that Germany was losing but refused to abandon. For the soldiers inside, the realization came slowly. The deeper they moved, the less it looked like a military position, and more like a hidden workshop, frozen in time. The leadership and command angle, orders in a fog of war at the command level. The Hurtgen operation was an exercise in endurance rather than brilliance. Generals like Norman Cota, leading the 28th Infantry Division, faced impossible decisions: press forward through the forest or risk encirclement. Every hill seemed to consume entire companies. Cota, known for his blunt realism, once described the Hurtgen as a battle with no front, no rear, only confusion. His men were bleeding for terrain that offered no strategic glory, just more trees, more cold, more death. Yet high command insisted the forest had to be cleared before advancing to the Rhine. Behind these tactical frustrations, however, was a quiet undercurrent of intelligence competition. Allied leadership was aware that Germany's scientific base, its physicists, engineers, and weapons researchers, was dispersing. Capturing those assets was as crucial as capturing ground. Orders filtered down through corps-level briefings, often vague, occasionally encrypted. Frontline units weren't told the full story, only that certain objectives were sensitive or to be secured intact. To the officers leading the assault on Bunker 473, this simply meant do not destroy it if possible, but few questioned why. In the chaos of the Hurtgen, questions could get men killed. After the capture, when intelligence officers arrived to inspect the site, the pieces began to fit together. The unit's mission had never been just about territory, it had been about discovery. And the soldiers, unknowingly, had walked straight into one of the Reich's buried secrets. Leadership in war often balances ignorance and intent. In this case, those who gave the orders may have known something, but those who carried them out would be the ones to uncover the truth. 6. The moral and intelligence angle. The weight of discovery. When word spread of what the soldiers had found inside Bunker 473, reactions within the division were mixed. Curiosity, disbelief, unease. War had conditioned them to expect blood and gunfire, not laboratories and locked crates. Inside, under flickering bulbs, they found equipment carefully arranged on tables. Reels of wire, glass tubes, strange instruments labeled in technical German. Some of it had been smashed deliberately, as if the retreating staff had tried to erase their work. Others remained untouched, preserved with meticulous order. Documents littered the floor, blueprints stamped with military insignia, chemical formulas, and notes bearing the word Sonderversuch, special experiment. To the untrained eye, it was indecipherable. To the Army's intelligence officers, it was a revelation. What the Americans had discovered appeared linked to research on propulsion and chemical compounds, possibly related to the same science driving the V-2 program under Werner von Braun. There were no prisoners, no guards, only the silence of a place abandoned in haste. For the men who found it, the moral impact was heavy. This wasn't a fortress, it was a workshop of hidden ambition. It hinted at how far Germany's engineers had gone. Even as their soldiers starved and their cities burned, some soldiers felt pride. They had stumbled upon something important. Others felt unease. That this wasn't a victory, but an unveiling of something darker. One lieutenant, writing in his post-war memoirs, recalled, "We thought we were fighting an army. But that day in that bunker, I realized we were fighting a machine, an idea so vast that it buried its own humanity beneath steel and science." That realization would follow him, and many others, long after the guns of Europe fell silent. The discovery inside Bunker 473 would now shift the nature of their mission. What had begun as a routine assault would soon transform into a race for knowledge, and the Allies would stop at nothing to claim what Germany had hidden. The morning of the assault began like so many others in the Hurtgen. Gray sky, frozen breath, and silence broken only by distant shell fire. The forest floor was slick with ice. Every movement cracked the stillness. The platoon from the 112th Infantry Regiment moved in 2 columns, keeping low beneath shattered branches. Their orders were clear: secure Bunker 473 and hold the position until reinforced. No artillery, no armor. The forest was too dense. This was infantry work, slow and unforgiving. At 06:15 hours, the lead scout signaled visual contact. The structure emerged through the mist like a buried giant, its sloped walls jutting from the hillside, half consumed by mud and snow. The steel door gaped slightly as if forced open from within. The air smelled of rust and diesel. The sergeant raised a hand, the universal signal to halt. Everyone froze. He studied the doorway through his binoculars. No movement, no flash, no sign of life. Still, instinct screamed trap. He nodded once. 2 engineers moved forward, crawling low. They probed the ground with bayonets, searching for tripwires. Nothing. A corporal covered them with his Thompson, eyes fixed on the dark slit of the entrance. Then, a sound. Faint. Mechanical, like a gear catching against metal. The men stiffened. A breath later, silence returned. "Door check," the sergeant whispered. The first engineer reached the steel plate, brushing away ice. The hinges were fractured, edges blackened, perhaps from an internal blast. With effort, they pulled it wider inch by inch until the blackness yawned open. No gunfire, no grenades. Only a rush of cold air that smelled of oil and burnt insulation. Flashlights flickered on. The beams cut through dust and fog, illuminating concrete walls, a narrow corridor slanting downward. On one side, a faded sign in Gothic script read, Zutritt verboten Sonderbereich. No entry, special area. It wasn't standard military signage. The first squad entered. Their boots echoed on the concrete, each step cautious, rifles raised. The passage bent left, then descended into darkness. The deeper they went, the thicker the air became, stale, mechanical, humming faintly. At 20 meters, they reached the first chamber. Empty bunks lined the wall. Personal items lay scattered, cups, papers, a torn photograph of a woman. The clock on the wall had stopped at 04:23, but it was the next room that changed everything. Beyond a steel door, partially ajar, they found a chamber unlike any they had seen before. A workspace, not a command post. Long tables covered in instruments, oscilloscopes, copper wiring, reels of magnetic tape. The walls were lined with storage lockers marked Gerät 117 and Kraftstoff Muster. The engineers exchanged glances. This wasn't a frontline bunker. It was a laboratory. Then came the first shock of movement. A soldier at the rear shouted, a low creak from beyond the hall. Rifles swung toward the sound. A door shifted, then fell off its hinge, crashing to the floor. Inside, a single generator sat sputtering, its tank half empty, still warm. Someone had been here, recently. Outside, the covering squad reported faint smoke rising from the ventilation shaft. The bunker wasn't entirely abandoned. The sergeant ordered the perimeter secured. Flamethrower teams took position by the exits. Engineers swept for explosives. One wrong step could bring the entire structure down. At 06:40, reinforcements arrived. Another platoon, along with an intelligence officer attached from division headquarters. He was a quiet man wearing glasses instead of a helmet. When briefed on what the soldiers had found, his expression changed. Not surprise, but recognition. He ordered the site sealed immediately. No demolition. No photographs until further instruction. The troops didn't know why, but his tone left no room for argument. They pulled back to the entrance, leaving the officer and two specialists inside. For several hours, muffled voices echoed from within. Occasionally, someone carried out a crate or a folder, each marked with the same insignia, a black eagle above the letters HWA, short for Heereswaffenamt, the German Army Weapons Office. By 0900, the sun had risen pale and weak over the treetops. The forest glistened with frost. The men outside smoked in silence, trying to make sense of what they had seen. Then the officer emerged, carrying a sealed box and a bundle of documents. This site, he said quietly, was not on our maps. He glanced toward the entrance one last time before radioing division command. Whatever lay beneath that bunker was no longer a tactical objective. It was now an intelligence priority, and the soldiers who had fought to reach it, mud-stained, sleepless, half-frozen would soon learn that they had stumbled into a secret far larger than their war. The assault was over. The discovery had begun. When the intelligence officer descended back into Bunker 473, he knew the signs. He had seen them before, in Normandy, in Aachen, in shattered laboratories beneath Frankfurt. Each one a piece of a larger puzzle, Germany's obsession with technology as salvation. The room was silent except for the slow hum of the dying generator. The officer's flashlight swept across the chamber, over the tables, the reels of copper wire, the steel cabinets with locking bolts. A fine layer of frost clung to everything. The air was heavy, metallic, tinged with the odor of acetone. He motioned to one of the engineers. Together, they forced open a large storage locker. Inside, instead of weapons, they found glass canisters, some empty, others half-filled with yellowish liquid. Each was marked with coded designations: N-Stoff, Tabun, Sarin. The officer froze. These weren't fuels. They were nerve agents and the most secret chemical compounds in Germany's arsenal. Substances so lethal that a single drop on skin could kill in minutes. For a moment, no one spoke. The realization settled like a weight in the air. Tabun had been developed in 1936 by German chemist Gerhard Schroeder, part of the IG Farben conglomerate. It was the first nerve agent known to man. and one of the Reich's most closely guarded secrets. Production had begun in 1942 under the utmost secrecy at a plant in Dehernfurth, Silesia. Only a handful of officers and scientists knew its true nature. Now, miles from that facility, deep in the Hürtgen forest, the Americans had found evidence that the Germans were storing samples, perhaps for study, perhaps for evacuation to the interior. The implications were chilling. The officer noted every label, every symbol. Some canisters bore the mark Wa-Proof 9, the branch of the German Army Weapons Office responsible for chemical warfare research. Others were sealed in lead-lined containers stamped Nur durch Befehl öffnen, open only by command. The crates beside them held folders, meticulously organized. Inside were technical schematics, diagrams of dispersal systems, valve assemblies, and field delivery mechanisms. Each page was stamped Geheim Kommandosache, top secret command matter. One file described alternative application systems for aerosolized compounds, possibly intended for artillery shells or aircraft munitions. Another outlined controlled evacuation procedures, plans to transport these materials westward as the front collapsed. The officer's pulse quickened. This wasn't just evidence of possession, it was continuity, proof that even as the Reich burned, it was preparing to preserve its most dangerous discoveries. By 1,000 hours, the site was declared a restricted zone. Engineers wearing improvised respirators began cataloging the finds. The Americans had no dedicated chemical warfare specialists nearby, so they handled everything with caution born of fear. Outside, the soldiers who had captured the bunker watched the operation unfold, unaware of the scale of what they had unearthed. Word spread through the line. They found something bad in there. Gas stuff, some joked nervously. Others stayed silent. One private wrote in his diary that night, "They say it wasn't ammo." It was something worse. Something they made in case the war turned against them. Maybe it already had. As the inventory continued, the officer discovered one more section of the bunker, a locked hatch concealed beneath the flooring. It led to a narrow stairwell descending another 10 meters. At the bottom was a sealed chamber, its walls blackened by fire. Inside lay the remains of burned documents and equipment, melted from deliberate destruction. But amid the ash they found a scorched plaque reading Schutzstaffel, Forschungseinheit 6, SS Research Unit 6. The implication was unmistakable. This facility had been more than a storage site. It was under SS oversight, likely tied to covert projects run parallel to official Army research. Some of those projects, involving nerve agents, biological materials, and even radiological testing, had been scattered across Germany in the war's final months. The Americans sealed the chamber, marked it for later excavation, and transmitted coded reports to Allied intelligence. Within days, higher command would link this discovery to similar finds across the collapsing Reich. The officer stood at the entrance before leaving, looking back into the cold dark. He understood that history had just tilted. The war for Europe would soon end, but a new race, for knowledge, for power, had already begun. By the time the platoon withdrew from the forest that evening, the bunker was surrounded by engineers and MPs. Its coordinates were erased from field maps. Its contents were loaded onto unmarked trucks and driven west under guard. Officially, the report filed by the division would read, "Enemy bunker captured. Contained scientific materials of interest to higher command." Unofficially, it marked the first time that American troops had laid hands on the nerve agents that would later shape the Cold War's understanding of chemical warfare. For the men who had fought their way there, it was just another bunker. But for the intelligence officers who followed, it was a doorway, one that opened not to victory, but to the grim realization of what humanity was capable of creating when losing a war. The forest swallowed the echoes of their departure. Snow fell again, covering the footprints, sealing the entrance like a wound that refused to heal. And in that silence, beneath the frozen soil, lay the first tangible evidence of the new weapons that would define a darker future. By the evening of December 16, 1944, Bunker 473 no longer belonged to the battlefield. It had become an intelligence site, one of the most closely guarded in the Hürtgen sector. Barbed wire was strung around the perimeter. Armed sentries posted at every approach. Engineers worked under dim lamps, wrapping canisters and crates in layers of canvas. Trucks idled nearby, their engines steaming in the cold. No insignia, no unit markings. The infantry who had fought for the structure were ordered to pull back 200 meters and establish a defensive cordon. They weren't told why. Soldiers asked questions that no one answered. Some said the bunker was filled with poison gas. Others whispered it was gold or treasure. The truth, that it contained the deadliest substances ever created, was classified immediately. The commanding officer of the 112th Regiment radioed headquarters at Stolberg. Objective secured. Unidentified chemical materials discovered. Request containment unit. The reply came 3 hours later. A detachment from U.S. Chemical Warfare Service would arrive within 48 hours. Until then, no entry was permitted, but the forest had its own plans. That night, artillery thundered across the line. The opening barrage of Germany's Ardennes offensive, known to history as the Battle of the Bulge. Communications faltered, and the Hürtgen sector was thrown into chaos. Convoys vanished. Supply lines broke. In the confusion, the Americans guarding Bunker 473 received conflicting orders: hold position or withdraw west to reinforce the front. For 24 tense hours they stayed, waiting for a command that didn't come. During that time, engineers continued their work inside. They documented the finds meticulously: glass containers, sealed cylinders, blueprints, machine parts. Each item numbered, photographed, and packed. A single misstep could have been fatal. The men handling the canisters wore improvised protection, gas masks, gloves cut from rubber fuel lines. One corporal, tasked with inventorying documents, later recalled in an interview, "We didn't know what we were touching. Some of it smelled like almonds, some like acid. We just did what we were told and tried not to breathe too deep." When the Chemical Warfare Service finally arrived, escorted by a small convoy, the team leader, Major Robert McAllister, immediately ordered a full quarantine. His report would later note the presence of nerve agent precursors, stabilized samples, and a partially destroyed research chamber with signs of deliberate sabotage. Within days, the materials were transferred to Allied Technical Intelligence Command, destined for laboratories in France and later Britain. Their chemists confirmed the worst. The substances were derivatives of tabun, Ga, and sarin, Gb, both previously unknown to Allied science. Their toxicity exceeded that of any known weapon. The discovery triggered a wave of urgency among Allied command. If Germany possessed such weapons, and if production facilities still existed, they could alter the final phase of the war. A secret memorandum circulated within Chef, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, summarized it bluntly. Immediate objective: locate and secure all chemical development sites before enemy destruction or Soviet acquisition. From that moment, the battle for knowledge overshadowed the battle for ground. Intelligence officers and scientists began tracing the web of research units linked to the Heereswaffenamt and SS Research Division 6. Each captured document from Bunker 473 became a map, pointing to hidden laboratories across Western Germany for the men who had first stepped inside. It was a strange form of victory. They had survived one of the war's deadliest forests, only to find that the real enemy wasn't just across the line. It was the knowledge buried beneath their boots. And as the snow thickened over the hills of Hürtgen, the forest once again hid its scars, while the war, in secret, began to shift from bullets to blueprints. By January 1945, the Allies had begun to realize the true extent of what Bunker 473 represented. It wasn't an isolated find. It was a fragment of a much larger effort, an industrial and scientific infrastructure that the collapsing Reich had buried beneath its soil. Across Western Germany, similar bunkers were being discovered: sealed vaults in the Eifel Mountains, chemical depots near Cologne, and underground workshops south of Kassel. Each one revealed the same pattern: evacuated technology, destroyed evidence, and traces of research far beyond Allied expectations. The discoveries from Bunker 473 became a cornerstone for Operation Alsos, the Allied scientific intelligence mission led by Colonel Boris Pasch and physicist Samuel Gaudsmit. Originally tasked with tracking Germany's nuclear progress, the Alsos teams expanded their focus to chemical and biological programs after reports from the Hürtgen reached their headquarters in Paris. Documents retrieved. From the bunker revealed codenames like Trilon, Enstoff, and Anlaga West, all linked to advanced munitions development. More disturbing were the lists of associated personnel, scientists, engineers, and SS officers whose names reappeared months later during Operation Paperclip, the American effort to secure German scientific expertise after the war. In early 1945, intelligence analysts pieced together the chain of command. The nerve agents found in Bunker 473 were traced to the Die Herrenfurth complex in Silesia, a massive facility capable of producing thousands of tons of chemical weapons annually. The plant had been evacuated as Soviet forces advanced, its materials and researchers dispersed westward. Bunker 473 had likely served as one of several waypoints in that evacuation, a holding site for scientific materials awaiting transport deeper into Germany or eventual destruction. The Americans had simply arrived first. The implications went far beyond immediate warfare. What the Allies had discovered in that forest reshaped post-war intelligence priorities. Within months, both Western and Soviet forces began a race to locate and claim the remnants of the German war science machine. It was not about revenge or justice, and it was about knowledge. Whoever understood what Germany had built would command the weapons of the future. The Americans secured research linked to nerve agents, jet propulsion, and rocketry. The Soviets captured similar facilities farther east. Each side accused the other of concealing information, and they were both right. The Cold War's scientific shadow race began here, in these hidden rooms carved beneath Europe's forests. The soldiers who had first entered Bunker 473 were long gone by then, transferred to other units or home after the war. Most never knew the scale of what their discovery had set in motion. Their names appeared only briefly in after-action reports, buried under lines of technical jargon and redacted details. In the archives, one declassified memo from February 1945 reads, Subject Hurtgen Forest Site, 473. Location secured. All material transported to attic under armed escort. Findings classified under CWS Intel Priority. Recommend complete site demolition to prevent civilian access. The demolition never happened. The forest reclaimed the site naturally. Trees collapsed over the entrance. Soil filled the cracks, and by the late 1940s, the coordinates were forgotten. In time, the Hurtgen Forest became a graveyard for both men and machines, a place where history lay quiet beneath layers of moss and memory. But among Allied scientists and intelligence officers, the discovery of Bunker 473 remained a reference point, the moment when the war's visible violence gave way to its invisible aftermath. The weapons that had been conceived in those bunkers would never be used in combat, yet their existence changed everything, shaping treaties, defenses, and fears for generations to come. And somewhere beneath the pines, in concrete silence, the empty shell of Bunker 473 endures, a relic of an empire that tried to weaponize the future. Its walls no longer echo with war, but with the reminder that what nations hide in defeat often defines what the world will fear in peace. The Hurtgen forest is quiet now. The trees have grown back, their roots threading through soil once churned by artillery and blood. The snow falls softly, muting the landscape that once roared with war. Beneath it, the bunkers remain, sealed, buried, forgotten by most, yet history never forgets. It only hides, waiting for those willing to dig. The story of Bunker 473 is not one of conquest or heroism, but of revelation, of what humanity is capable of building when desperation meets genius. Those concrete walls concealed not gold or secret orders, but knowledge, dangerous, precise, and utterly indifferent to morality. For the soldiers who found it, it was just another day in a war that refused to end. For the scientists who later studied its contents, it was the beginning of a new era, one defined not by trenches or tanks, but by invisible weapons and unseen frontiers. In a way, that moment beneath the forest symbolized the entire twilight of the Second World War, armies still fighting in mud and ruin, even as the next war, a silent, scientific one, was already beginning. What they uncovered in that frozen bunker would ripple through decades: chemical treaties, arms races, new doctrines of deterrence. But the lesson was older than any weapon, that progress unmoored from conscience leads only deeper underground. Today, hikers sometimes stumble upon cracked concrete hidden beneath the pines. They see moss, rust, decay, but beneath their feet lies a chamber that once held the future in glass and steel, a future born in darkness. Preserved by fear, discovered by chance, and as the wind sighs through the trees of the Hurtgen, it carries a whisper from 1944, a reminder that even in the quietest corners of war, humanity's greatest danger is not what it destroys, but what it learns how to build.